Welcome to another session. I hope you are well. In today's session, I would like to use a short video as a teaching session to convey a concept that I think is very important for everyone to understand. I talk about dating, and I talk about intersexual dynamics, but also talk about other subjects such as finances and personal finance and other parts of wealth creation. Today's session will be an amalgamation of the various topics that I have covered in my channel over the many years. I want you to take a look at this first.
We have probably just under $1 million in debt, and we want to know how to get debt-free without filing bankruptcy.
Okay, how much of that is a mortgage?
The mortgage, about $210,000.
So you have $600,000 in what?
$335,000 is about in student loans. We both have advanced degrees, and then a lot. The rest is really credit cards and personal loans.
So you have $300,000 of credit cards and personal loans?
We have about $335,000 student loans and about $136,000 in credit cards, $44,000 personal loans, and $35,000 car loans.
Okay. How old are you?
I'm 29.
Okay. So what in the world?
Yeah.
I mean, are you both on this, or is this just one of you that's completely lost your mind?
Well, I have the majority of the student loans, and he has the majority of the credit cards. My credit card debt is not great.
Okay,
it's
so why does he at 29 years old run up $100,000 in credit card debt?
Well, he's 32, but I think it's one of those things where just making really poor financial decisions, thinking be able to pay it down as you go, and then it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And
okay, so you both have advanced degrees. What are your degrees in?
We do. So I have a degree, both of our advanced degrees. No, he has an MBA, and I have an advanced degree in policy. I work in the government, and we actually both do now at this point, actually.
Okay, so your household income is what?
Our household income is about $230,000.
Okay, all right. Is there recognition on both of your parts how absurd this situation is?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, there is.
Right.
So I think we're both a bit scared and want to do anything we can to avoid.
Okay, great. Then I'm on your team. I can skip that step. Okay, go ahead.
Now, I hope you was just as shocked as I was when I saw that. Now, fair use. The actual video in its entirety is about 9 minutes. There were certain parts that were not included in that short clip. I haven't played the entire 9 minutes for obvious reasons. I'm using a short part as part of my teaching experience, rather than just uploading someone else's content completely. I'll make reference to two things that were not addressed in that short clip you just listened to. The first has to do with the fact that the person in question, if you forgive me, let me just turn this down so I do not get any distractions. The person in question, the lady who was on the phone, made two additional statements in the full discussion. The first was that the home that they have, they do not live in that home. It is rented. They have had to move in with their parents just to give themselves some time to recover from the financial shock. Number two, in addition to everything that has been outlined or that you heard in summary or in brief, the other important statement that was made by the lady was that they had just got married. They had just been married recently, very, very recent marriage. Now with that, what I'd like to talk about in today's session is how to give yourself the most important opportunity to make sure your decisions are correct. Choosing a spouse should not be taken lightly. Now, whether you're making that decision for marriage reasons, or whether you're making that decision based on just cohabitation, or based on some form of partnership agreement, legal or formal partnership agreement, it's important to make sure that you make decisions that are shrewd. It is possible to be emotionally you might say emotionally bonded with someone. The word escapes me right now. Perhaps it'll come back to me. Unequally yoked, that's the word. It's possible to be emotionally well yoked with someone. It's possible to be mentally well yoked with the same person. It's possible to be even spiritually yoked with the same person, mentally yoked with the same person, but be financially unyoked. In other words, if you were to study, I find one of the best ways to make sure that your decisions are the best, based on the outcomes you want, is to begin with the end in mind and work backwards. But in this particular instance, we have to go no further from biology or the medical field or sciences. There's something called a postmodern. In a postmodern, what tends to happen is you study cadavers or dead people's corpse, the purpose of which for medical students is to teach medical students the causes of the death. Sometimes you can go through cause effect, but also go beyond that and study the symptoms. Things that were clues that something was wrong. The purpose of that is to equip medical students with the ability to understand the cause-effect relationship, but more importantly, how to diagnose and understand when it's important to make corrective, preventative decisions based on people's health to avoid accelerating and bringing forward the possibility of death. I use a concept that I call pre-modern. A postmodern means you wait until the event has taken place. In other words, until the person has died. And then you could go back and you say, knowing what I know now, Kwink, knowing what I know now. Knowing what I know now, what would I do differently? It's an interesting way to learn about life, but it's perhaps the slowest way and the most painful way to learn. In other words, you're investing your time, your resources, and you're learning from your mistakes. There are two ways of learning: mentors or mistakes. Both are equally valid. One costs much more, the other costs significantly less. We can put it in a different way. PM, personal, or PE, personal experiences. OPE, other people's experiences. Learning from your mistakes and your experiences is one of the worst and the slowest ways to learn. You can avoid it, which is why in many of the great books, you are encouraged to seek, to ask, to seek, and to knock. In other words, you can buy wisdom. You can find out what you have to do by learning and gleaning from the wisdom and the lived experiences of other people. Let me bring you full circle to relationships. I stated that it's possible to be emotionally, spiritually, mentally, even physically in sync with someone. The where we make a mistake is that we do not go beyond the physical and the emotional and the in-love phase and ask very important questions. An interesting question, a valid question, a necessary question is a simple one. Where are you financially? Are we financially yoked? Many years ago, I learned a concept. It's so simple. Many people already understood this concept. At the time, I didn't understand the concept. it was a simple one. A financial statement is comprised of two sections. Now, I'm not talking about a professional, a business statement. That is made up of three sections. But for the individual, a personal financial statement is made up of two sections. Income statement, balance sheet. And then you have what we call a cash flow. A cash flow statement is supposed to be the third of the two, what we call the three statements for businesses. The cash flow statement simply measures money that flows in and money that flows out and the net balance. Income statement shows the revenue you generate or the income you were paid and your expenses. The balance sheet shows, very simply, what you own, what you owe, your net balance. When you meet someone, it's a very simple question. You can ask, what is your net worth? Your net worth is simply the net of your assets and your liabilities. Keep this very important statement in mind. It's simply called the basic accounting equation. Assets equals the total amount of assets you have. And in many ways, let me keep it simple. Your assets will always equal the liabilities you have, in other words, the credit or the money owed to other people, plus the equity you have. Basic accounting equation, assets equals liabilities plus owner's equity. If you take all of the things you owe to other people, you combine it with all of the equity you have, in other words, your own net equity, that gives you the total value of the assets. The key part is here is your net worth is simply you deduct from your liabilities, or rather you deduct from your assets all of your liabilities, and that will give you what we call owner's equity. That is your net worth. Now, in the clip you just saw, the lady described what they owed from a debt perspective. I did my calculations, and I shared my calculations with a small group of people. What she described amounted to about $740,000 US. However, the total value, the present value of all of her debt as of today is roughly about $1.24 million. The reason being, imagine you have this debt, but you have already made an obligation. You have a commitment, a contractual commitment to pay a certain amount of interest on the debt for a duration of a period until the debt is either paid off or until the term comes to an end. Of all the things identified, student loan is a form of debt that cannot be written off. You cannot claim bankruptcy on that. The mortgage has a fixed duration. The car loans have a duration. The personal loans have a duration. All of her debt, all of their debts have durations. So what you do to work out how much you actually owe is you take the present value of what we call the principal debt into each of the items she identified, what we call the face value, the present value of the face value, the present value of the face value of the debt currently on the books, plus what we call the annuity. In other words, those agreed contractual payments annually over the entire duration of the term of the loan, and you discount it back to the present. And what you find is, although the face value of the debt is roughly $740,000, the total present value of the entire debt, in other words, the money owed plus the interest owed, is about $1.24 million. The key thing to keep in mind is that to understand what debt is, you always have debt only occurs when you have either a fixed or contractual claim, where if you do not make a payment, negative things happen, and where there's a duration and an obligation. In this particular instance, 1.24 million was what was owed. Now here was what's sad. 29 years old, 32 years old, just got married, weeks into their marriage. Although they have a home, it's rented because they cannot afford to live in the house because of the entire debt they have. The reason I use that example is so you can understand that if you were to look at divorce lawyers and solicitors, one of the most important causes for divorce across any part of the West, certainly in the UK, and across the world, is for financial reasons. You can be yoked equally, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically, but if financially there's maybe a disconnect, either because you're both overwhelmed or one person is overwhelmed, that can be the root cause to a separation or the dissolution of a significant relationship. So one of the best ways to get yourself in a place where you're certain that life should be easy and you can win is to have a pre-modern. A pre-modern is where you analyze the possible risks before you even start the relationship. Rather than a postmodern, in this particular instance, they are going through and they will have to go through a postmodern. They are in significant crisis. Here's what's sad. The couple in question live in Washington, D.C., or Washington State, as I was able to deduce from the actual 9-minute clip. The federal laws apply, therefore. They can't claim bankruptcy under the state laws. It has to be the federal laws. Here are some of the issues. It's a horrible place to be. The student loan cannot be bankrupt. You have to pay that back. The mortgage or the house, you can't claim bankruptcy because the mortgage belongs to the bank. They have a lien on the house, so they will simply hold onto whatever equity you have in the house, and they would simply retain the house and sell it, and whatever the difference, providing what is owed to them based on the loan is covered by the sale of the house, then you're free to walk away. If it isn't, you're still on the hook. In parts of the United States, you have personal guarantees. So it really depends on how much equity they have in the house. When the house is sold, you can't claim bankruptcy on the house because the mortgage company will simply say, no, we'll just take the house back and we'll reconcile A equals L plus E. Assets equals liabilities plus owner's equity. You have a loan amount, the property is worth X, the net value when sold, deducting all the expenses from the transaction, will give a certain amount. We deduct that amount you have, we take our loan, we deduct our loan from the total amount, and that tells you what you have left. If that number is positive, you're winning. Your obligation is cancelled. If the number is negative, you still owe the bank. So they cannot claim a personal student loan bankruptcy. They cannot do that on the property. With the cars they own, no company will allow you to claim bankruptcy. They will simply say, well, let's just retrieve the cars. Or, number two, why don't we restructure the loan? We'll extend the period. Rather than 10 years, we'll give you 20 years. Rather than 8% interest, we'll reduce it to 4%. It's called a loan debt restructure. The purpose is to guarantee that they get their money back. And they will put in, for good measure, some extra amount to make sure that the extra duration and the extension, they get paid for that, to avoid losing money. On the personal side, maybe something can be done. So what you find here is a very, very terrible situation. Now, even if they were to go bankrupt or declare bankruptcy, they ruin their credit rating almost for life. Sometimes it takes up to 25 years to get that removed from your credit report on file. Most likely, if they did that, they will lose the 2 cars, so they can't go to work, so they lose their income. The point I'm making here is the next few years for this couple will be horrible. The key question is whether they are both yoked on the emotional side with regards to finances. If one person says, I cannot downsize, I want to keep living like the Joneses, then you will have an issue. That will lead to a divorce, because what you have is one person wanting to live within their means and pay back all the debt, and the other says, thinking, well, I can't let people think that we're broke. My reputation is important. The key point of today's session is to say as follows. Many young people, especially women, and the reason I talk about women is not because I am attacking women per se. I say this because men and women play 2 separate functions in the sexual or in the relationship marketplace. Women are gatekeepers to their bodies, their emotions, and their womb. A woman decides who she gives her affection to and intimacy to. She decides who she gives her body to. She also decides who she reproduces and brings into the next generation, the seed. The woman makes that choice. No baby is born. No baby is born in this country without a woman accepting or agreeing or making that choice. So with regards to the woman herself, she is the gatekeeper. She chooses, she gives that key to whoever she chooses. But when it comes to marriage, cohabitation, civil partnerships, men are the ones who are gatekeepers to marriage. We are the ones who ask, the woman accepts or rejects. So we are gatekeepers to the invitation process. We choose who we give our last names. We choose who we want to pair bond with forever. And we choose who we want to commit to long term. The woman still has a choice. She can reject or she can accept. Now, what this simply means is that the vetting process with regards to marriage and making sure that you, the woman, are with the right person, the vetting process lies on you, the woman. When it comes to just dating or trying to get intimate with you, the vetting process is with the man. So we have to learn everything we have to learn. Be witty, be funny, be intelligent, be resourceful, ability to protect, ability to provide, priestly in our manners, be able to profess our love by our presence, our responsibility. Men, on the other hand, we have learned that one of the ways to get to a woman, intimate with a woman, is to understand her ego needs. So men will say anything. Men will sell their birthright for the opportunity to have time with you. And what that simply means is women have to be more careful about what a man says and not to just accept wholeheartedly his promises. If he says, well, I make six-figure salary, or I earn a certain amount of money, and you see he drives a certain type of car, lives in a certain type of location, all of that could just be the glitz and the glamour. And beneath that could be a pile of debt, which you will inherit half of that debt if you marry him. You have to learn how to look beneath the surface, ask the right questions, so that you're not carried away by, his charisma, his words, how he speaks, his intelligence, the accessories he has. Men will do anything. In this country and in this environment we live in, the modern dating scene, women have made it very clear that it is a war, that only the victors get a taste or a bite of the apple. So what you find is, back in the day, you didn't buy what you could not afford. Let me give you a good example. I remember so many years ago, my first time ever wanting to buy a BMW. Incredible car. 3 Series, it was amazing. And I remember going down and inspecting this particular car. And I thought, this is just fabulous. It was so good. And I calculated that I could afford to buy the car, but I could only afford to buy the car by about 1.3 of the price of the car. In other words, I could pay for the car by 1.3%. So 1.3x, 130%. I was raised that if you cannot buy something 2 times over, in other words, you have twice the amount for the vehicle with the other in standby, you cannot afford it. I could afford to pay for the car, but I would have only had 30% of the residual value of the price paid for the car in an account. So if something were to have happened to that car, forget these days when you have insurance and everyone is covered. Back in the day, you had the car, you paid for repairs. And if the car was written off, I needed to make sure that I could afford to buy a second car. I did not have 2x of the price of the car, so I didn't buy the car. Now, today, young boys in their 20s, I see some of them driving cars that I know that if you were buying that car as a brand new car, it would cost you in excess, sometimes of £150,000. And if you apply the same principle of 2x, that's £300,000 just for a car. I know many of these young men do not have such sums. But You can go to a company and you can loan or lease a car for £200 per month, and every single day you can drive around a really, really high-end car, and people perceive and think that you're wealthy. The keeping up with the Joneses is alive and well. The point I am making here, social media has created an environment where people are living lives that are not consistent with their net worth or their actual financial statements. A woman therefore has to make sure, recognizing that the man is the one who invites, he's the gatekeeper to relationships and marriage, the woman accepts or rejects. The burden of performance is on the woman to make sure that she vets the man carefully, because on the day you sign those documents, you are now liable for half of his total assets, but you are liable for half of his total liabilities. We go back to the conversation we had about the lady. Both of them are in debt. Here's what's interesting, but also what's sad. You add the debts they own, you add all the assets they own, you take the difference. I said $1.24 million is the value of the total debts. If you aggregated all of the assets, and let's assume from the conversation that took place about the house and the value of the house, we say the net equity in that house is roughly £50,000. And you add the two cars and any other savings they have, we give, let's assume it's £100,000. Suddenly we have a debt of 1.24 million, an asset of £100,000. We say £100,000 less 1.24 million would imply that the net balance, the net equity, the owner's equity is negative 1.14 million pounds. You divide it by 2. Each party owns half of 1.14, 570,000 US dollars. Each of them owe. On the other hand, let's assume before they got married, the lady was familiar with and had some basic financial understanding. And she had siblings and she had family and friends who simply asked a few questions. What do you do? Oh, you have an MBA. Great. What do you earn? £140,000 or dollars. Great. He makes money. The deception is to think that high income equates to high net worth. You're just a glorified slave. You might have a job, and the definition of job simply stands for just over broke. Most people who have high paying careers or jobs also have very high lifestyles, so much so that they have nothing. If your outgoing exceeds your income, then you're guaranteed to be in a position where your upkeep will become your downfall. The basic thing we learned, and perhaps this is a very great time and a good time to introduce a recommendation. The book, The Richest Man in Babylon, is a book that everybody should have and read. It's so simple. It's basic. 2 concepts come from that book. Number 1, if you have a job, which you should do, try to live within your means. Number 1, very simple. In other words, don't spend more than you earn. Second idea was pay yourself first. Put aside some saving, some investment, so that you can compound your wealth and then live on the remainder once you've deducted your 10% or your saving, whatever that amount is. Simple concept. If at the early stage of the relationship, the girl, her friends, her family, her network, her inner circle said, what does he do? Well, he earns £140,000. He has an MBA. Great. All fantastic. The more important question should have been, what is his net worth? What does he owe? What does he own? Is he cash flow positive? It's possible to have assets that are in the millions, but the liabilities of those assets or connected with those assets are 2-3 times more than the value of the assets. So in other words, you have a negative net worth. If a family and friends had said, well, what is his net worth? And they estimated, well, listen, he has a roughly say £600,000 debt. And if you married him, you would inherit half of that 300,000. You, on the other hand, you have roughly another £600,000 in debt, and he would inherit half of that. It would have been an opportunity for both parties to apply some caution. Better a little caution than much regret. Think things through carefully when it comes to relationships, and don't be swayed by the glitz and the glamour. There are two areas, and I close with this statement. There are two areas that I see most people ignore when it comes to vetting and choosing an important mate for the long-term basis. The first is character. Character. The second is finances. Two cannot walk together except they agree. I have had friends who have broken up relationships after so many years. Why? One person believed in saving and investing for the long term, and the other believed and needed to spend money immediately. Two separate visions. Eventually, the relationships ended. So let me leave you with the following thoughts. Get the book, The Richest Man in Babylon. And if there is someone significant to you in your life, gift them a copy of the book. Within the first week of gifting them that copy, not just ask, but demand that both parties read the book individually, then read the book together as a pair. One person reads aloud one page or one chapter, the other person reads aloud the next chapter, and just alternate. And at the end of the first month, talk about what you've learned. Talk about how it applies to your lives. Sit down, pull out a piece of paper. On one side, each person should identify their income statement, the money that comes in, the money that goes out, all the expenses. On the second statement, identify what you owe and what you own. And quantify not based on what you paid. Quantify not based on what the market price is. Quantify them based on what we call liquidation value. I'll give you a good example. You have a house. The price in the market for comparable houses is 1 million. The debt on the house is 800,000. Therefore, there's a £200,000 equity on paper. But to sell the house of 1 million, let's assume you bought the house for 800,000. Hence the debt. It would mean that you'd have to pay taxes, capital gain taxes on the 200,000. Let's assume it's 20%. So that's 40,000 to be paid in capital gains. Let's assume you pay 5% to the person who sells the house. That 5% of 1 million means you're paying almost 50,000 to the person who sells the house. So that's 50,000 plus 40,000, 90,000 just in expenses. Let's also assume, as part of the sale process, there are certain provisions that have to be met, whether this be statutory or regulations. Let's assume you spend another 10,000 to include cleaning the house, painting the house, moving out, etc. Your total expenses is 100,000. Remember, the house is 1 million based on its market price. You owe 800,000. The mistake you may have assumed would have been to say, well, I have £200,000 in equity. No. The net realizable equity, in other words, the liquidation value minus all the expenses, which would be the net realizable value, is only 100,000. So identify what you owe, what you own, but more importantly, your net equity. The basic accounting equation again is assets equals liabilities plus owner's equity. Take the value of the assets, the net realizable value of the assets, subtract all of the owed sums, and that will give you your balance. So in this particular instance or example, you only have an equity value of £100,000 from a realizable perspective. Sit down, prepare your income statement, your balance sheet, and here's the key part. Look at what I call your cash flow statement, which should identify the money that comes in and the money that goes out. At the bottom of your cash flow statement should be your cash balance. In other words, your income statement might show you were paid £100, You spent £80. At the bottom, there should be a net profit of £20. But there could be money that goes into upkeep, maintenance, etc. It could be £2. You take 2 from 10 is 8. So in your cash flow statement, it would show, remember, your income statement is on an annual basis. Your balance sheet is on a consistent, accruing basis. It just continues to compound. Your cash flow statement, on the other hand, is on an annual basis for a period. So what you find is that you start the period, you end the period, you have £8 in cash. That cash then goes to your cash flow statement. So by the end of the next season or the next period, if you've also saved another £8, you then have £16 in cash. That cash should be reflected in your balance sheet as an asset. Cash is an asset. The point of all of this is to simply say, sit down, identify where both of you are financially and whether you're financially in sync. More importantly, read the book and talk about what you think and the value of money. What is important? And if you find that both parties are not yoked, if one person thinks about the future long term and saving and investing and delaying gratification, and the other person wants to spend, it doesn't matter how emotionally, spiritually, physically connected both of you are, the relationship will fail. I hope that's been useful.